My new work has been released. Welcome everyone to read my work in tomato novel. I hope everyone can enjoy it. Your attention is the driving force behind my writing, and I will strive to tell every story well. Chapter 1. Opportunity Entering the Stone Pillar. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. The sunlight shone on my head, and it was noon. At dawn, the last group of brayed soldiers, carrying the looted goods, drove livestock and villagers, and shouted out. I crawled out of the corner of the collapsed house, with a mess everywhere, except for a few scattered corpses of villagers. There was no one. At this moment, the numb legs began to tremble involuntarily, and hot tears rushed out. There was a faint sound of horse hooves, getting louder and louder, and the sound was heard by many people. I quickly hid back, tightly covering my mouth, controlling my breath, and my heart was pounding like it was about to jump out. The sound of galloping hooves suddenly stopped not far away, and the loud and angry female voice said, "It's still late. It's the army of Daming." I suddenly stood up, hundreds of white sickle hooks and long spears shining brightly in the sunlight, and the bright red Qian character on the military flag rushed into my eyes. Even an 11-year-old girl like me knows this is a famous white army. What person? Recently, a soldier noticed me and pointed a long gun in my direction. I walked out and bowed to the leading horse, saying, "I'm hungry." The person on horseback scrutinized me for a moment and then loudly said, "Give her food, rest the whole army in place, wait for the rear army to follow, and the squad will return to Sichuan." Quickly and orderly, the soldiers buried the villagers, fed their horses, and lined up one by one to receive military rations. In addition to 2 cakes, each person also had a little bit of dried meat. From the conversation with the soldiers, I knew that this tall female general who looked as old as my grandmother but seemed to have infinite power was the divine General Qin Liangyu whom I had always admired. Her story of attacking the Jin people and pacifying the extravagant Chongming was the one I loved to hear the most. She kept pestering my father and telling it over and over again. This time, the Qing army besieged Kyoto, and the bygone army was ordered to come to the capital to pay tribute to the king. During the retreat of the Qing army, they plundered everywhere and abducted countless civilians. General Qin divided his army into several routes and rushed to pursue them. If it weren't for the general using his family funds to supplement military supplies, how could we have such good military provisions, and how could we repair weapons and armor in a timely manner? Our brothers wouldn't have died so few. A middle-aged soldier suddenly stood up, sighing. "General. Prepare some food for her and escort her away from here." General Qin had taken off his golden helmet, unloaded his gun, and only had a simple knife at his waist. He stood in front of him, tall and beautiful, even taller than an ordinary man. "No, I want to follow the general." I stood up like a soldier, straightened my chest, and when the general turned around, I exaggerated and grinned foolishly, gently tilting my head. In the past, my dad used to eat this kind of trick the most. General Qin was serious but not fierce. "Follow me, where is your family?" "General Hui, my name is Yu Jingrong. My father, Yu Linquan, was originally a small official under the head of the Ministry of Revenue. A few months ago, the head recommended him to take office in Yingzhou, and he originally said he would come back to pick us up after settling down there. Unexpectedly, the Braid army suddenly arrived and threatened to pacify Yong'an and attack the imperial city. My mother took my brother and I back to my mother's house to take refuge, but on the way, we encountered a chaotic army that dispersed in the chaos, with only an old servant following me. After wandering around a few places, I had just stayed in this village for half a month when I encountered a Braid army sweeping the village. Thanks to the old servant hiding me well in the dark, he went to guide the Braid army himself. Later, he was robbed along with the villagers, and his life and death were unpredictable. The foreign invaders are rampant, the internal turmoil and disputes are raging. Sigh, I don't know if my mother and brother have safely arrived at Grandma's house now, nor do I know if my father has taken office smoothly. General, I have nowhere to go. What's more important is that I have admired generals since I was young, letting me know that even though I am a woman, I can still charge forward and protect the country and the people. Women are not weaker than men. I met you in danger, and it was fate that made me follow General. I was originally a thick-skinned person, and this will help me escape danger. My nature can't be concealed right away. Judging from your words, actions, and manners, you are also considered clever and polite. Let's stay for now and make arrangements when we have news from your family. Qiao, you take her with you. General Qian turned around and left. A young general who had been following her nodded at me, and I quickly followed up. My dad said that anyone would like a bright and intelligent little girl like me, and it's really nice. The army returned to Sichuan, and the journey lasted for almost a month. Along the way, I ate and lived with Qiu Yao, only to find out that she was also a girl, not a young general. This is her first time going on a military expedition with the general, and it took her a long time to get his approval. Qiu Yao is 3 years older than me, exactly the same age as my brother. She was originally from Liaodong. 10 years ago, the Jin people invaded Liaodong, and all of Qiu Yao's family were killed. Qin Minping, the younger brother of General Qin, rescued her from the Jin people and brought her back to Sichuan. Later on, General Qin kept her by his side and felt like a family member, so she changed her surname to Qin. Now that she is only 14 years old, she is well thought out, proficient in military tactics, and has learned good martial arts from General Qin. During exercises, those adult men are rarely her opponents. Qiu Yao said, "There's nothing scary about war. I'm not afraid at all when I think about so many people dying at their hands and my family. But the general only allows me to accompany the army and doesn't let me go to the battlefield, saying that I'm still too young." Qiu Yao also said, "We don't usually live in the yamen, we live at home, which is the old mansion of Ma Mansion. We should be home in 2 days, and when we get home, don't call me General Qin, call me Madam." Yes, General Qin and the chieftain Ma Qiancheng had a very good relationship. After the chieftain died of illness in Yunyang prison, the general took over the position of chieftain. Although she later received a reward from the court and was promoted to the 2nd rank, she should have preferred the identity of Madame Ma privately, let alone the fact that she had a decree in her possession and called her Madam, which was not inappropriate. After leading the army into Shizhou, General Qin sent his troops back to their respective camps to station, while himself led his followers to hand over to Xianwei Prefecture and dealt with the trivial matters of detention during the expedition. It's already winter, and the Sichuan region is not as cold as the north. I waited alone outside the mansion under the sun, and after a while, a little sweat oozed from my nose. Some of the nearby trees are still green, completely different from the bare appearance of their hometown. General Qin came out with Qiu Yao and 2 attendants, strode onto the horse with a relaxed expression, and after some thought, he got off the horse and said, "Let's take a walk." Qiu Yao quickly took the reins and let the 2 attendants lead the horse along. After only a few hundred steps, when you turn around, you will find a bustling street market with numerous shops and crowds. At first glance, people's attire may not seem much different from others, but there are various subtle differences, such as the patterns on their skirts or the styles of their hair buns. Upon closer inspection, they are all novel to me, and occasionally I can even see people dressed completely different from head to toe. Qiu Yao told me that this is the largest street market in Shizhou. Apart from the Tujia, Han, and Miao people, there are also other ethnic groups trading various things every day, which is naturally lively and extraordinary. Jingrong, go pick some clothes and objects. Since Shizhou has arrived, please stay well. Thank you, madam. General Qin turned around and gave me a slight smile, showing the kindness of his elders. Chapter 2. Autumn Extension enters the army. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Madam said that girls should also learn more skills, so I followed Qiu Yao to practice martial arts and archery in the morning, military tactics in the afternoon, and mostly read and write in the evening. Qiu Yao loves to play with her spear more and has a headache for reading. She often tells me when my wife is not around, just know some words, why read so much all day? Not everyone can be as skilled in both literature and martial arts as my wife. I just laughed that she and my brother should get along well and let them know sooner or later. Speaking of which, my older brother Yushangrong has loved to wield swords and clubs since childhood. He is addicted to pondering various martial arts every day, and his father chases after him every day while holding up his books. One year, a monk named Qian stayed at my house and saw that his brother was a good material for practicing martial arts, so he accepted him as his disciple. Since then, Master Xinjue has gone on a trip and returned to teach his brother for a while. When his brother was 12 years old, Qian disappeared for over a year before appearing. When he had to leave again, his brother insisted on being with him, but his father agreed without any hesitation. Not long before we took refuge at home, Qian escorted his brother to the doorstep and ran away, saying that with such a troublemaker, his free time had been disturbed. I am willing to write and read, and when I was 6 years old, my father even hired a master to teach me. After seeing Madam's literary talent, I have put in even more effort and hope to write excellent articles like Madam as soon as possible. Surprisingly, I also had some talent in archery while practicing martial arts. At first, Madam asked Xiao Yao to teach me, but later she saw my performance on the martial arts arena and occasionally gave me personal guidance when she had time. When I was 4 months old in Shizhou, my wife learned that my family had settled down separately. My father had successfully taken office in Yingzhou, and although my mother and brother had been on a thrilling journey, they finally arrived safely at my uncle's house. I have decided to stay with my wife for a while and learn more skills. My father wrote 2 letters in a row, expressing his gratitude to his wife and reminding me of his advice. In the blink of an eye, it was already the 5th year of Chongzhen, and in the past 2 years, Qiu Yan and I had become inseparable. It was hot and stuffy today, and Qiuyan was exhausted from practicing his gun skills. I threw down my bow and arrow, leaned in her ear, and said, "Let's go catch fish in the creek." Qiuyan hesitated for a long time before looking up at the motionless treetops. "Let's go." As usual, we climbed over the wall and emerged. In fact, Madam is not here these days. It's just the fear of squatting on wooden stakes that makes us feel more intimate when we climb over the wall. Madam has been going out too frequently lately, and her face has become increasingly heavy. Has something happened again? I used a bamboo basket to pat the grass on the roadside, so that the mosquitoes could fly further away. I heard that there is constant turmoil everywhere, and the court is tired of suppressing it. The Jin people have been harassing the border, and they are watching closely. Qiu Yan looked worried. Madam is almost 60 years old, running around all day. I only hate myself for not being able to share my worries. Qiu Yan, if you go on another expedition with Madam, you must take me with you. Now, go catch the fish. I grabbed her hand and ran away. The small stream in the valley ahead is the best nearby. It is not dry all year round, and the water is only 1 zhang wide. The old trees on both sides of the stream are shaded, and the water is cool and sweet. The water depth is just below the calf, and small wild fish are clearly visible at the bottom of the water. Such a good place, of course, Qiuyan and I often steal it. Madam does not allow us to be lazy. Wait. Qiuyan suddenly stopped, gesturing for me to be quiet. She quickly climbed up a tree, examined it for a moment, and then quickly came down. There were 4 men by the stream, naked. In the past 2 years, Qiu Yan has briefly set out with his wife once again. Although the enemy fled upon hearing the news and did not take over, he had never seen anything in the military camp and did not feel any taboos. Let's go and take a look. We took a light step and the cat leaned closer. 2 of them stood in the water, shoving and playing. 2 of them sat on the rocks by the stream, chatting aimlessly. There were several small fish jumping in the fishing net next to them. It doesn't seem like a bad person, but taking up our space is also annoying. Look at me. I picked up a few small stones, thought for a moment, and then looked for a few smaller ones again. Pa 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 pa, 4 times, almost simultaneously hitting a stone on their buttocks and backs, and almost simultaneously shouting ouch and turning their heads to look around. Where did you come from? How come you've never seen it before? I jumped out from behind the tree and put on what I thought was the most ferocious look. Madam said, no matter what you do, you can't lose your momentum. The one who looks the eldest among the 4 is only 17 or 18 years old. At this moment, he stood up and quickly put on his clothes, then cautiously looked up and down at us. Where did you 2 girls come from? Qian silently sighed and walked forward, clasping her fists, saying, my younger sister has been reckless. Not far from here is the captain's mansion and the garrison. We cannot be careless. Please clarify your identity. The leader turned around and looked at the other 3 people, also clasping his fists and saying, I am Fong Mizhan. My family used to run a small escort agency, but my father was robbed while he was on his way, and my mother and brother were killed while the chaotic army was charging towards the city. The defending soldiers were weak and dared not face the enemy. They left the people behind and ran away. It was the White Army who avenged me, so I came all the way to join the army. They were Wu Fei, Shao Qi, and Hai Zi, the brothers I met on the way, and their family members were all gone. They came with me. Hai Zi was the youngest, only 11 years old, and we were worried that the military camp would not accept them, so we have been hovering around. I can't make up my mind. The thinnest one should be Hai Zi. Upon hearing this, I looked anxiously at Fong Mizhan and then buried my head. Hai Zi can live with us, I'll go beg madam. Qian's gaze stopped me and he thought behind his back, all right, I'll go find the people from the kitchen camp and arrange Hai Zi to do some miscellaneous work. You 3 can rest assured to sign up for the army. Really? Can you arrange it? Well, don't worry, I will definitely handle this matter for you. I am Qin Qian, she is Yu Jingrong, and we can be considered as the envoys. Disciples, familiar with the people in the military camp. The latter half of Qian's statement was not very straightforward. After all, we have never formally worshipped a teacher, although in fact, Madam is already our most respected teacher. Your Excellency, you're talking about General Qin, the stone pillar Tusi. Fong Mizhan and his 4 companions showed a surprised expression, and Qiu Yan looked at them seriously and said, the military camp is not as good as outside. Fighting on the battlefield is not a joke. You need to think carefully, I've figured it out long ago. Besides seeking revenge, we also want to protect the people of one side, so that they won't be bullied and their young children won't be homeless anymore. The speaker was Wu Fei, and his wandering life couldn't hide his bookish anger. Yes, if possible, I want to run away all the bad guys and live a peaceful life by marrying a wife. Shao Qi was probably already 15 or 16 years old, and when he said this, he laughed with a sly smile. Fong Mizhan insisted on stuffing the fish they caught into our bamboo baskets, and then the 4 of them followed me and Qiu Yan to the military camp. The White Army eliminates some soldiers every year. They either get older or suffer serious injuries on the battlefield and cannot continue to fight. In such cases, the madam will retain their military household organization, exempt from taxes, and provide a fixed subsidy every year. So the military camp has always been recruiting new soldiers, but the selection is relatively strict, and physical fitness and identity are carefully examined. We hid in the distance, watching Fong Mizhan, Wu Fei, and Shao Qi pass the examination smoothly, get their uniforms, and then sneak to the kitchen camp with Hai Zi to find De Zhu. De Zhu is the captain of the kitchen staff camp. When he sees Qiu Yan, he always just scratches his head and laughs foolishly. He can agree to anything. That's all for Hai Zi's matter. De Zhu, ha ha ha, I teased Qiu Yan all the way, but Qiu Yan ignored me with a stern face. When we were about to get home, we realized something was not going well, and Madam came back. Qian stopped bothering me and pulled me to hide behind the stone lion, saying, "Throw the fish away." I held on to the bamboo basket and said, "We've never caught such a big fish before. I say throw it away. Just don't throw it away. 2 girls, madam asked you to go in. Don't grind this stone lion outside. The stones are about to be polished. Also, don't throw the basket in your hand. Madam wants to see it." At some point, the gatekeeper of the Ma mansion, Xiao Jiading, stood behind him. "Xiao Jiading, you wait." I held the basket and threatened softly, then put on a pitiful look and followed Qian towards home. Madam stood under the big pine tree in the courtyard, as calm as usual, but the worry in her eyes deepened. "Madam," Qian lowered her head and stood there. I stopped a few steps away and hid the basket behind me. "You guys, I really think I don't know every time I climb over the wall, I just hang out on you. Watching you always reminds me of when Liner was a child, and now he and Fengyi are stationed outside, rushing around. But as the situation worsens, I am deeply worried. General Ma and Madame Xiao are both exceptionally brave and have a deep understanding of strategy. They have received your true biography, madam, and will definitely win 100 battles. Madam, you can rest assured." I quickly took up the conversation, hoping to wait for Madame Xiaozhan to come up with a plan. "You don't know that after Huang Taiji ascended to the throne, his intention to advance in the Central Plains became increasingly strong. The Jin people often entered the border to scout, but no one dared to fight in the Ming dynasty. The rebel forces in the north and west were huge, constantly threatening the court. Recently, I have visited other chieftains in the surrounding areas, but none of them were willing to join me in sending troops to suppress the bandits. They all planned to remain calm and profit from the situation. After careful consideration, I have decided to expand 2,000 soldiers in Shizhou and Zhongzhou, intensify training, and wait for opportunities." Madam's hair has turned gray, but she still remains resolute. But in recent years, the military pay of the court has been far from sufficient. Even if you run out of family wealth, madam, you cannot support it. Qiu Yan looked deeply at madam. "I have written a letter to my hometown in Zhongzhou, and there will always be a solution. Qiu Yan, you are already 16 years old, and although you grew up by my side, I cannot force you. Now I give you 2 choices. One is to find a good family, and you can marry and live a good life. The other is to officially join the army, protect the country and the people, and fight on the battlefield. From then on, personal matters and even life and death may be uncontrollable. I won't marry for the rest of my life, I'll accompany my wife." Qiu Yan was very serious. "Foolish child, what will happen in the future depends on fate and the court. If the court does not completely reform." I have never seen Madam's mournful expression before. Autumn Yen straightened her back, and I secretly clenched my fist. "Tomorrow morning, Qian will accompany me to the military camp. Jingrong, I have sent a message to your father to pick you up when the weather cools down. Now that your mother and brother are also in Yingzhou, you should go back and reunite with them." I left the bamboo basket and hurried to my wife's side, saying, "No, I won't go back. I want to go to the military camp with Qian, and I also want to be like you, to protect the border and the people. No one can take care of you next. When your father's person arrives, you can leave." Madam, although she couldn't bear it, turned around and didn't look at me anymore. She walked straight to the inner hall and said, "Autumn Yao, go cook a bowl of fish soup. Don't waste the fish. Jing Rong, go stand on a wooden stake for 2 hours." Qian was stunned for a moment, then picked up the bamboo basket and ran quickly. I only felt the cold wind blowing in the summer. For a long time, he shouted to the empty yard, "I don't need anyone to take care of me," and then obediently stood on a wooden stake, not knowing if fish soup would leave me a bowl. The next morning, Qian combed her hair in a men's style bun, dressed in a plain training uniform, with tightly tied cuffs and pants legs. She lifted her spear and looked like a handsome young general again. She carries very little with her, except for 2 personal clothes and a commonly used wooden comb. I eagerly watched as Qian repeatedly instructed me, "You can't be lazy alone. Practice your skills well, and Madam may still keep you." I handed her a small paper bag and said, "This is the peach cake I asked Xiaojiading to buy yesterday. You usually give it to me to eat, and you take this with you. When Madam is not around, I will secretly visit you and Fong Mizhan and the others. By the way, you must not let the veterans bully them. Also, don't let De Zhu take advantage of you. He dares. What are you thinking all day in your little head?" Qian stuffed the peach cake into her bag, walked out the door, and turned back seriously, saying, "Jingrong, I know you have your own ideas, otherwise you wouldn't practice so diligently every day." Chapter 3. Winter Solstice. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Qian went to the military camp, and her wife allowed her to come back to the mansion to accompany me on the 1st and 15th days of each month. She said it was to accompany me, but in fact, when we met, she would beat me up first to test if my martial arts had improved, and then give me advice on where to go. I need to practice like this. Where am I not capable? Even though Qiu Yan is practicing tirelessly in the military camp, in addition to regular exercises, he challenges and fights with different people every day. The originally fast-paced shooting technique has become even more fierce and ruthless. Every time after she leaves, I secretly get tough and practice hard, hoping to take on more moves from her next time and not lose so badly. Madam herself is getting busier and busier, only occasionally going home at night. Whenever she comes back, she will take some time to give me some tips on practicing martial arts. Madam once said, "Your martial arts and marksmanship are reassuring to Qian, but you are not as tall as me and Qian, and your body is agile. You should practice more horseback archery and swordsmanship." So she ordered someone to specially give me a suitable length war sword, select excellent bows and arrows, choose a handsome white horse, and even allow me to occasionally go to the military camp to practice with soldiers. The grassland at the foot of the nearby mountain is where I practice daily. When Xiaojiading comes to bring me food, he always rolls his eyes and says, "The energy of this practice seems like it won't live tomorrow." In the blink of an eye, it was late autumn when my father wrote a letter saying that the Jin people and the bandits had been harassing me. He was working tirelessly in Datong and couldn't arrange for anyone to come and pick me up next spring. The letter also states that he is a civil servant who mainly assists in solving military needs. There is no need to go to battle to kill the enemy, as long as the city is not broken, it is safe and there is no need to worry too much. Mother is doing well, don't worry about anything. How can I not worry? But the night I hid in that dilapidated house made me realize that I must become stronger in order to protect myself and the people around me. Meeting my wife and Qian is my blessing, I will cherish them well. In the winter of that year, Yingzhou unexpectedly had early snowfall. Winter snow was already rare here, let alone the day before the winter solstice. The snow stopped when it was less than a finger thick, and people of all ages on the street were overjoyed. The children squatted in the corner of the wall and rubbed small snowballs, chasing and playing with each other. The street is full of the smell of stewed mutton and the sweet taste of boiled rice dumpling stuffing, which is as lively as the winter solstice festival in my hometown, but the taste is different, especially the rice dumpling stuffing, which takes a lot of effort. Red beans soak overnight, boil until thoroughly rotten, filter out the bean skin and water with spun yarn, add lard and sugar, stir-fry carefully, and taste soft. Madam and Qian are coming back for dinner tonight, and we will spend the winter solstice together. The kitchen lady in the mansion has been busy early in the morning. I think it's been a long time since I expressed my gratitude to my wife and Qian. I should prepare some gifts for them during the holiday and end my practice early, so that I can come out and take a stroll before dark. I was carrying an antique hairpin and preparing to pay when suddenly there was a muffled sound beside me. The man standing next to me immediately knelt down with a thud. I took a step back and secretly grasped the dagger hidden in my waist. I've been staring at you for a while, can you take out the things yourself or wait for me to find them? A young man in a blue robe tilted his sword hilt against the man's neck. It turned out to be catching a thief. I relaxed and looked at the young man, but I couldn't help but see that there are really people in the world who look so beautiful. In Chinese, they are 8 feet long, with a face like jade and eyes like shooting stars, but that's all. What purse? The man is still denying it. The young man glanced at him and spoke calmly, the chicken owner's hanging money, the 10 taels of silver on the ready-to-wear shop counter, the red purse of a girl in red, the blue purse of a chubby ant, and the golden hairpin on the head of a woman in yellow. This was also just arrived. The young man kicked the steamed bun that had fallen to the ground. Your stealing skills are not bad, it's a pity, it's a pity. I held hands while watching the play and looked up to ask the young man, you've been with me for so long, how did you take action? Only by accumulating more can we determine the severity of the crime, said the young man calmly. I am dumbfounded. At this moment, the chubby ant who had lost money and the chicken owner ran over. The chubby ant pushed aside the crowd of onlookers, grabbed the man, and slapped him, causing tears to come to his eyes. Let's go, come with me to see the official. The chubby ant and the chicken owner pulled the man away, and the young man looked at their backs, touching his chin and sighing, if I had known they were so tough, I wouldn't have done it myself. I laughed beside me and said, this ant should join the army. If Madam adds an ant's camp, the enemy will definitely flee every time. The young man grinned at me casually and said, goodbye, then turned around and left. I once again sighed in my heart. This person looks really beautiful, so I quickly went to the leather shop to buy knee pads. Although the stone pillar is not as cold as my hometown, the moisture is extremely heavy. My wife's knee has been injured, and the knee pads made of good leather can make her feel more comfortable. When I returned to the mansion, it was already completely dark. I happened to meet Madame and Qian at the door, and I went forward to salute Madame. Qian deliberately put on an elder sister's demeanor and said, Madame is leading the whole army in the military camp to worship the heroic spirits of the ancestors of Ma and the sacrificial soldiers of the White Army. She has been busy until now, and if you don't help prepare dinner at home, why are you running outside so late? I quickly apologized. As they were walking towards the big pine tree in the courtyard, 2 people came out of the house and kowtowed to Madame to greet her. Madame went over and helped her up, saying, I've been tired all the way, get up quickly. It's been years since I last saw you. You also have white hair in the East Tower. The man known as the East Tower is a tall and sturdy man with a bold face, firm lines, and bright eyes, making him a capable person at first glance. Standing behind him was the blue-clad boy who was catching thieves on the street. I widened my eyes beside me, guessing what identity this person was, while the young man casually glanced at me and then looked elsewhere. Donglu Huifu said, yes, 2 more years, 50. I don't know how many more years I can work for the leader and you. The leader misses you very much. His body and bones are really not good, and I hope you can go back and see him. What's wrong with Big Brother's illness? I asked the divine doctor privately, and he said that the lord of the great fortress probably has at most 6 months left. The East Tower burst into tears. Madame also tearfully wiped the corners of her eyes and said, it's my fault. Although it's not far away, I'm busy every day and haven't visited my elder brother for almost a year. As the end of the year approaches, tell my elder brother that I will go back in a few days and celebrate the Chinese New Year with him. Donglu responded, wiped away his tears, and pulled the young man who had been standing behind him. This is Sur, my second brother's child. This time I will come with you to see you, and I will also recognize the way. In the future, he will help me with some errand work. The lady looked at the young man for a moment, then nodded and said, he is a good-spirited child. Everyone sat down inside the house, and the East Tower took out a stack of silver notes from their personal clothes. I received your letter, and the lord of the great stronghold ordered me to gather and gather. In the past few months, I have gradually sold some of my ancestral property, and a total of 200,000 taels have been raised. 50,000 taels have been kept for the military of Yingzhou, and I have brought you this 150,000 taels. This year, the grain harvest in the stronghold is not good, and the grain of the Yingzhou garrison also needs to be replenished, so there is no grain to be transported to Shizhou. Being able to have 150,000 taels is already beyond my expectations. Big brother and you have been very dedicated, and our Qian and Ma families have also lived up to the emperor's kindness. Madame took the silver bill, asked Qian to collect it inside, and then ordered the dishes to be served. According to the custom of Shizhou, the main dish on the winter solstice night is mutton soup. The lady always dislikes extravagance. The side dishes are braised bream in brown sauce, stewed chicken, fried garlic sprouts with smoked bacon, fried cabbage with frozen tofu, and a plate of cut sausage. Of course, fragrant glutinous rice dumpling is indispensable. A meal was quite enjoyable, and the lady had many questions to ask the East Tower. After the meal, they continued to chat together, and the young man in blue also accompanied them. Xiao Yan and I ran back to our room early to chat about the endless gossip we could never finish. Chapter 4. Comparison. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I thought I woke up early enough, but to my surprise, Madame and Xiao Yan went back to the military camp before dawn. After having breakfast in frustration, I continued to practice on the grass at the foot of the mountain as usual. The snow in the south cannot hold up, and it has almost completely melted all night, with only a faint hint of white in the deep grass and crevices of rocks. I first warmed up with a gun and was about to get on my horse to practice riding and shooting when a leisurely voice came. I didn't expect the person to look small, but the marksmanship can still be seen. Would you like to compete? It was a young man in blue. I didn't realize when you came, I felt a bit discouraged. The young man gave me a casual glance and said, I finished practicing swordsmanship early in the morning and looked around. When I heard the sound of horse hooves, I climbed up the tree. Who knew it was you? I have been looking at it openly, and you didn't notice it yourself. Humph, use strong words to argue. I heard that Madame and Uncle Donglu have been calling you Sur. What is your surname and who is Madame? The young man seemed unwilling to talk to me anymore, but he lazily spoke up, our family's surname is Wang. 30 years ago, our whole family took refuge in Yingzhou and received protection from the Qian family. Later, my uncle was trusted by the leader of the big village and assisted in handling various affairs of the village for more than 20 years. So, I am not a lady or someone else, just following my uncle's orders. Are you really good at fighting? Fight, but I'll use a knife. Before I could finish speaking, I drew a knife from the back of my horse and immediately slashed it horizontally. I was planning to steal an opportunity, but to my surprise, Wang Su reacted very quickly and drew his sword to block the knife in an instant. Then he swept his leg and took 2 steps back. The little girl is quite ruthless. There's no such thing as a knife in the girl's house. It's not good. Looking, it's not good. Looking. Wang Su, with his sword blocking his chest, didn't forget to joke. Don't worry, I withdrew my strength and won't hurt you. I leapt over and slashed in the air. When I was blocked, I immediately changed my attack to his abdomen. He easily dodged several moves in a row. If you want to hurt me, you'll have to practice for a few more years. Wang Su suddenly dodged my side, tapped his elbow on my shoulder blade, and then kicked me behind my knee, and I was restrained. This is my way to catch that thief, how about it? Humph, vulgar means. I stood up and rubbed my shoulders. This is a legitimate secret skill passed down by the Wang family. Wang Su sat down with a clean stone and inserted his sword into its sheath. I put the knife aside and leaned my back against a big tree, saying, Why have you been only defending and not attacking? Wang Su glanced at me and said, There's no need. I was angry and said, "Have you ever fought on the battlefield, or made military achievements so well? Why go?" I thought it was natural for the people in the Qin family's village to join the White Army. When he asked me this question, I was stunned for a moment and then answered confidently, "Of course, it's to drive away thieves and kill enemies, to defend our country. I don't have such lofty aspirations. Can't you see that the territory of the Ming dynasty has been repeatedly violated, the country has been humiliated, and the people have been trampled on recklessly, thieves have caused chaos, causing harm to the country and the people. What if I see it?" Wang Su became serious and said, "I ask you, whose home is to be protected and whose country is to be protected? Isn't this current situation because the imperial court has been cheating for a long time? The emperor is incompetent, and the treacherous and sycophantic people persecute loyalty and righteousness at will, so that there are no generals available and no one dares to fight. The corruption of the court and military is ingrained in the marrow, and soldiers often go to the battlefield hungry, while those beetles still live in luxurious clothes and food all night long. Do you know what misfortune our Wang family avoided by abandoning their property, and why did Madame's husband die young in prison? Although I obey my uncle's orders, I do not agree with the actions of my wife and the village leader. Such a court, humph." I walked up to him and said, "Corrupt officials can be killed, corrupt politics can be eliminated. Even the emperor is not. Cannot be changed. The suffering is for the people, who are robbed, humiliated, and killed, separated from flesh and blood, and have a precarious life. I think my wife's loyalty to the court is mainly to protect the people. You have been growing up in Yingzhou since childhood, with the protection of the Qin family village and the White Army. You really should go elsewhere to see the burnt villages, the elderly and young children who died tragically, and the eyes that died but were still frightened." Wang Su looked at me with a curious and wavering gaze, but suddenly smiled and said, "Your words have been heard by others, and you will be beheaded. No, you will be executed by the 9 clans. I'm still young, talking nonsense, haha, haha." I picked up my knife and pretended to dance. "I'm leaving, hoping that next time we meet, you'll have an interest in me taking the initiative. See you later." Wang Su stood up and walked a long way before turning back. "Are you called Jingrong? Work hard, Zia Jingrong." "Humph, you remember for me, my name is Yu Jingrong." A few days before New Year's Eve, General Ma Xianglin, the son of Madame, and General Zhang Fengyi, the daughter-in-law, jointly wrote a letter stating that due to the tense situation in the north, they were unable to return home. However, there was a good news report informing Madame that General Zhang Fengyi was nearly 4 months pregnant. "Madame, it's rare for her to be so happy in these years." After taking care of the Yamen and military affairs, she took me and a few old servants to Yingzhou for the Chinese New Year, and Qian stayed at the military camp. Returning like an arrow, I set off early in the morning and arrived at the Qin family village as soon as it was getting dark. The East Tower came out to greet me. Perhaps because of joy, the leader of the village was in good spirits and supported himself to get out of bed. The siblings chatted until late at night since dinner. Although Madame has a lot of things to deal with, she still has a lot more leisure than usual. She spends 1 or 2 hours with me every day, demonstrating and teaching me the techniques of swordsmanship and archery in detail. The Qin family village is built by the mountain and water, and there is a very large racecourse in the village. Madame said that she spent half of her childhood practicing on the racecourse. Nowadays, the guards of Qin family village often practice here, and the young people in the village also train and compete here. I hang out with young people all day long, but I haven't seen Wang Su. After inquiring, I found out that he followed his mother to Suzhou to celebrate the Chinese New Year with his grandfather. Chapter 5. Going Home. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On the 16th day of the first lunar month, Madame bid farewell to the village leader with great pain and returned to Shizhou. In February, bandit armies rebelled in multiple parts of the country. While Mrs. intensified her military training as a precaution, she also solicited military provisions from large households in Yingzhou. Autumn Yen no longer has time to return to the horse mansion. I practice swordsmanship and horseback archery alone every day. In March, the leader of the village passed away, and his wife went to mourning. In just 2 days, she quickly rode back to Yingzhou. In April, my older brother Yu Shangrong was ordered by his father to take me home. Farewell madam, I went to the military camp to bid farewell to Qiu Yan and Fang Mizhan, and then set off with my brother. In early May, he entered Datong Prefecture and arrived at Yingzhou. The gate of Yingzhou city is not large, obviously just repaired and reinforced. In addition to the guard army, there are also 2 huge wolf fangs standing on the city wall. After entering the city gate, you can see knife carts and knife forks densely arranged on the inner side of the city wall. Some soldiers are using their vehicles to transport iron briars and charcoal and fire oil needed to make fireballs. Less than 200 meters away from the city gate, there were no signs of preparation at all. Merchants came and went, and the street market was filled with shouting and playing noise. My brother and I rode horses side by side in front. At this moment, we slowed down and watched as we walked. The 2 guards also rode horses and followed not far or near from the back. My older brother looked at my confusion and explained, Datong is an important gateway for my Ming dynasty. The guards have always been strict, and all the governors in Datong have been diligent and efficient. All the subordinates and commanders have also done their best. Under the management and deployment of the governor, Yingzhou has orderly defense and moderate offense and defense. The people of Yingzhou are accustomed to quickly evading military emergencies and can even assist the army in defending the city. They live a leisurely life. On the other hand, our father and father have been struggling to maintain the imperial court salaries in recent years, and we have to do everything we can to maintain them. We are very worried all day long. As he spoke, he saw the Governor-General of Yingzhou, a relatively small yamen mansion. From outside the courtyard, he could only see 4 large tiled houses, with only 1 guard at the entrance. There was an ear room on the right side of the door, and inside the ear room, 2 book clerks were talking. I was about to dismount when my brother quickly stopped me and said, Dad doesn't let us come to the yamen. We'll go straight home on the street behind the yamen. Brother asked the guards to go in and inform my dad, and then led me home. I exclaimed for the 10th time on the way, Brother, you really look like an adult now. You are calm in your work, not anxious or impatient. 17 years old, I'm already an adult, my brother said, but his eyes were filled with hidden pride. Just a few dozen meters away from our home, the servant at the entrance of the courtyard shouted, Young master and young lady are back, and rushed in. As soon as we stepped into the courtyard, we saw our mother eagerly welcoming us out. Mother! I ran up and threw myself into her arms. Hurry up and show me, it's been 3 years since I last saw you. I've grown taller and looked even better now. It's a big girl. My mother looked at me from head to toe, tears streaming down her face with joy. After all this time, I've been hanging on my heart for you day by day, and now I'm finally okay. I'm doing well with Mrs. Qian, I can beat my brother now. I circled around my mother and then hugged her arm, coquettishly saying, I often think about my mother's sweet and sour pork ribs, and I can't even sleep well. I'll do it for you later. My mother smiled and patted my hand lightly. My older brother also leaned in and said, Don't be biased, Mom. You also need to cook me 2 dishes that I love to eat. Jingrong, your bragging skills are also impressive now. When will you compete with me? My mother deliberately pursed her lips and said, You haven't known how to let my younger sister go since I was young. Hey, Shuangyun, come and see Jingrong, you haven't seen each other in 6 or 7 years. At this moment, I saw a quiet girl standing behind my mother, her goose-yellow dress accentuating her delicate features. Upon hearing this, Shuangyun approached me and my brother and saluted, Cousin, cousin. Shuangyun cousin. Why are you here? Dad never mentioned it in the letter. I held her hand. When I was a child, I went to my uncle's house and lived with my cousin for half a year. We used to have the most fun. Let's go into the house first and chat slowly. Mother led her back to the house and sighed as she sat down. After your aunt passed away, your uncle was running around trying to maintain the business of the one family, while also taking care of Grandma and Xuanyun. It's really hard to take care of them. Plus, Xuanyun is getting older now, so it's not convenient to follow her father for many things. Last time I went back, I brought her to Yingzhou. In the first 2 months, your uncle wrote to me, asking me to pay attention and find a good mother-in-law for Xuanyun this year. Xuanyun blushed with embarrassment and said, "Auntie, you're making fun of me again. My cousin hasn't gotten married yet, how could you just come to me? Besides, my cousin is back, and we'll have to live together for another 2 years." I laughed heartily and said it was okay. My mother stood up with a smile and said, "Your siblings will talk, I'll arrange dinner." After that, she led Grandma Hu to the kitchen. After his mother left, Xuanyun became less reserved and said, "Jingrong, you didn't encounter any danger along the way, did you? I often hear my uncle say that things are very chaotic outside now." I waved my hand and said, "I have encountered 2 groups of robbers. The first group consisted of a few dozen or so people, who were very weak and were quickly cleaned up by the 4 of us. I didn't even have time to take action seriously. After interrogation, I found out that they were originally villagers nearby and had no choice but to rob on the mountain road. They were all skinny, and my brother gave them some money and sent them away. However, I estimate they will still do this in a few days. The second group only had 5 or 6 people, but they were all trained in martial arts. We had to work hard to escape, but fortunately they were not injured." Xuanyun's eyes widened as he listened, and his brother angrily said, "If it weren't for protecting you, I would definitely be able to control them. That's because you've been blocking by my side, and my knife can't even be used. You said I can fight, but do you believe me?" Brother became enthusiastic and said, "Bibi." Xuanyun quickly stood up and said, after finally returning safely, "Let's take a break. Jingrong, can you tell us about what happened at Shizhou? We all admire General Qian. I will recount the situation of these 3 years in detail. For a long time, I heard footsteps outside, and it was my father who had returned. Dad. I ran over and knelt down. Dad, Jingrong has come back. Good daughter, get up quickly. My father looked at me with obvious excitement. I've grown up, I've grown up. Dad, I tugged at my father's sleeve with heartache. It had only been 3 years since we last saw each other, but my father seemed to be 10 years old. His thin and dry face was filled with deep worries and exhaustion. After having dinner for over an hour, most of the conversation revolved around me and General Qian. My father occasionally exclaimed that General Qian was actually the pillar of the country, and it was a stroke of fate for me to have this connection. After dinner, my mother took me to my room, and the furnishings were no different from those in my hometown in Kyoto. I hugged my mother again and acted coquettishly, saying intimate words that could only be spoken between mother and daughter. After so long, the lingering longing finally filled my heart steadily. Chapter 6. Deserters. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After returning home, I still retained the habit of getting up early every morning to practice martial arts. I was afraid of disturbing my family, so I searched for a secluded place in the alley. 2 out of 3 days, I would meet my father sitting in a small sedan chair to the yamen. During dinner, my father added an unchanging topic and asked my brother to accompany me in practicing martial arts, being careful not to bump into me. My brother always says he has his own things to do, how can he spend all day with this little girl like me? At first, Xuanyun followed me with great interest for 2 days. Later, she said it was better to read books and learn some business principles. When her uncle couldn't do it anymore, she would take over. The words that Xuanyun often says to people now are, Since Jingrong can practice martial arts, I can go into business. My father can no longer use the tactic that women should not show their faces to restrain me. On this day, in early summer, the sunshine and gentle breeze revealed the rare brilliance and tenderness of the northern region. Early in the morning, I encouraged Xuanyan to visit the Shakyamuni pagoda in the Buddhist temple. It is said that it is difficult for the entire Ming dynasty to find a magnificent wooden pagoda that can be compared to it. After experiencing countless wars of various sizes for hundreds of years, it has stood upright without falling. Even during the Wanli and Tianqi periods of my dynasty, 2 earth movements were unscathed. It is a pity not to go and see it. Xuanyan hesitated and said, Auntie has repeatedly said that we cannot leave at will. If we want to go out, we can only stroll around the nearby market. I leaned closer to her and said, let's go quietly, go back quickly, no one will notice. By the way, we need to bring some water and dry food. Suddenly, 2 dry coughs came from outside the window, and my brother flashed out. I heard everything you said. Then he turned his back and remained silent. Brother, can you take us there? I grinned. Brother remained unmoved. I need to talk to my dad tonight about how much I need my brother to practice with me. Also, my brother should read more books. My brother rolled his eyes and said, I want to go, but I can't go like this. The tower is outside the city, so we need to disguise ourselves and wait for you. As he spoke, he dodged and left. After a while, my brother took 2 sets of clothes and threw them to me and Xuanyan. Put them on, you all pretend to be men, and we dress up as traveling merchants to avoid encountering bandits. Xuanyan was still hesitating and said, Are you really going? Auntie will be very angry if she knows. I dragged her into the room to change clothes and said, If you keep dawdling, there won't be enough time. The Shakyamuni pagoda in Fagong Temple is indeed exceptionally majestic, standing about 20 zhang high with 5 floors and 6 eaves. The pagoda stands tall in the blue sky, and the pine tree pagoda is solemn and dignified. Looking up, one cannot help but feel a sense of pride. It is worthy of the praise of emperors throughout history for its extremely divine craftsmanship and wonders of the world. When I was a child, I was able to see some of the world with my dad. This tower is truly unique, Xuanyan couldn't help but admire. My older brother furrowed his brows and looked around. Although there aren't many people in the mood to come out and play now, there shouldn't be none other than us. Be careful. Just as I was about to be cautious, I suddenly heard a surprised voice. Yo. Oh, hold on. We 3 looked at each other and walked around towards the back of the tower. A group of people gathered in a circle, and then there was no movement again. Let's poke our heads and see, hey. 2 people stood in the middle in an independent posture, each with 7 layers of stones under their feet. The standing foot only pointed at the stones with its toes, looking precarious, but both remained motionless. How impressive. I couldn't help but marvel, as people around me gestured for me to remain silent. However, my brother shouted loudly, Master Monk. I just noticed that the person with my back facing me, although wearing rural clothes, is a bald, semi-long and not short beard that hasn't been taken care of for a long time. Upon closer inspection, it is indeed Master Xinjue. Qian glanced at him from the corner of his eye, his face lit up with joy, and he withdrew his leg and jumped back. The stone immediately fell to the ground and scattered, causing a sigh around him. No comparison, no comparison. Good disciple. Qian hugged his brother and said, I was looking for you. Yo, Jingrong is also here. Good and good. The person who was competing with Qian was a middle-aged man, tall and burly, with a dark complexion. At this moment, he walked over and bowed to Qian, saying, Master, you have great martial arts skills. Goodbye by chance. Qian hastily said to the man, Amit Ba Buddha, goodbye by chance. He took his brother and said, good disciple, take me to eat quickly. I haven't eaten for 2 days, I'm hungry. I joked, I haven't eaten for 2 days, so I still have the strength to compete with them here. Yingzhou scratched his head and said, that's why I compared myself to him. Otherwise, it would be better to have a quick and painful battle. Hey, that man really doesn't know how to understand my old man. For more than an hour, he refused to give up. My older brother couldn't help but shake his head and said, you are truly my monk master. Yingzhou nodded at Shuangyun and whispered to his brother, when did you get married and don't want to pay respects to your master? I couldn't help but laugh and say, this is cousin Wen Shuangyun. Shuangyun smiled at the back and said, master doesn't look like a serious monk at all. No wonder my cousin and cousin often talk about you. Yingzhou patted his brother's shoulder and said, I'm sure he didn't speak well of me. 4 people found a small shop nearby by the roadside for a meal, with simple conditions and only needed tea, vegetarian noodles, and 3 plates of side dishes. My brother and I each briefly informed Yingzhou about the situation in recent years. My brother asked Yingzhou, Master, where have you been in the past 3 years? Why hasn't there been any news? Yingzhou pulled the noodles in his mouth, his speech unclear. I went to Jiangnan, then to Guangdong and Guangxi, and then back to Anhui. Not to mention, there was a lot of commotion everywhere. When I was in Qingyuan, I couldn't help but kill a few officers and soldiers who took advantage of the chaos to rob the people. I hid in Yingzhou for a few months, and now there hasn't been any movement. I'm not looking for you. Me. Is Jiangnan also in chaos? Suzhou. Brother. Are you really only killing a few? Yingzhou glanced at me and said, it's not Suzhou, it's Yangzhou. As a wandering monk, I'm afraid I'll have to go for a stroll in deserted mountains and ridges in the future. Hee, good disciple, you know me better. I couldn't help but make a few moves, and some officers, soldiers, and thieves have been killed. The atmosphere became dull, with only the sound of Yingzhou hula eating noodles. After paying the bill, the sun had already set halfway, and the setting sun had turned most of the sky red. I gave my horse to Yingzhou, and I rode the same horse as Shuangyun. Brother looked at the sky and said, we need to hurry up, otherwise we may not be able to make it to the city. Unexpectedly, less than half a mile after leaving the small shop, 2 arrows suddenly shot out on the roadside, barely brushing the horse's head. The horse suddenly stopped and Shuangyun couldn't hold on to me for a moment, falling off the horse. Cousin. I pulled out the knife hanging from the horse, jumped off the horse and helped Shuangyun up, protecting her behind me. I also took out the dagger from behind my waist and gave it to her. Shuangyun trembled and held the dagger tightly in his hand. About 10 people rushed out from around, 2 of whom were holding bows and arrows, and at this moment they were all pulling their bows to the brim, ready to fire at a single touch. Others are all knives or spears, with fierce faces. Yingzhou and his brother quickly approached and placed me and Shuangyun in the middle. A skinny man stood up, probably the leader of the group, and said, leave the horse and money, let you go. Brother snorted coldly, grabbed his long stick and wanted to step forward. Yingzhou didn't know where to find a peanut and shook his hand before hitting the skinny man. The speed of the attack was extremely fast, but he still managed to dodge and the person standing behind him fell down with a muffled groan. Be careful, these people are not easy to deal with, they don't look like ordinary bandits, said my brother, who guarded us even tighter. The skinny man also saw Yingzhou's strength and said, I said, as long as you have horses and money, you don't want to take action, or you can just keep the horses. Yingzhou said, unfortunately we are in a hurry and cannot do without these horses. Why don't we wait a little longer, benefactor, to see if we can wait for someone willing to give you a horse? The skinny man gritted his teeth and said, then don't blame us for being impolite. Brothers, come on. Before he could finish speaking, he swung his big knife and rushed over, while the others also stepped back and rushed forward. The elder brother's long stick danced with a rustling sound, and the shadow of the stick flipped over. After shooting down 2 flying arrows in different directions, he swept them horizontally, causing the 2 criminals to take a few steps back and fall to the ground. Yingzhou remained calm and jumped off his horse, facing the thin man's knife and charging forward. As he approached the edge of the knife, he suddenly bent down to dodge, hitting the thin man's chest with his left elbow and forcefully pushing out a palm with his right hand. The thin man threw himself half a meter into the air. The skinny man had just landed, and Yingzhou had already pushed the 3 of them back one after another with lightning speed. A dozen or so criminals became cautious at the sight of the situation and dared not rush forward, distancing themselves from us. The skinny man was able to jump up in one fell swoop, his hand holding the knife bulging with veins and his gaze becoming increasingly fierce. I am in charge of those 2 archers, and everyone else has been handed over to Master Jingrong, please guard Xuanyun. My brother stood in front of him with a horizontal stick, staring closely at the direction of the archer, his legs secretly gripping his horse's belly. Yingzhou smiled and said, "Good disciple, you also look up to your master too much." The first time I encountered such a fierce and difficult opponent, I couldn't help but feel very nervous. Yingzhou's state made me calm down and said, "Brother, rest assured." Xuanyun also took a deep breath, no longer trembling, widened his eyes, stood back to back with me, holding a dagger tightly and facing the criminal. "Okay." Brother led the pioneer horse to jump out and head straight for one of the archers. Like a thunderbolt, a stick hit the archer's temple, and the archer fell to the ground before he could make a sound. There was no further movement. Everything happened in a moment. Before the villains could react, my brother had already turned his horse's head and ran towards another archer. The villain with a long spear next to the archer stood up and stabbed, but was hit by his brother's stick before turning around and stabbing the horse's belly. At the same time, 2 other villains wielding knives attacked from the back, with their brother resisting from both sides and constantly keeping an eye on the flying arrows. They were trapped for a moment and fought together. The other villains, led by the skinny man, surrounded the 3 of us. Yingzhou jumped up high and struck the villain's forehead with one palm, taking away the long spear. He muttered, "Amitabha Buddha, we're going to kill again," but his movements became faster and heavier. The long spear in his hand was like a conscious lightning bolt, and the spear saw flesh. There were still 2 villains who came over to snatch the horse during the gap. I swung my knife forward and was blocked by the other person's knife. I quickly drew my knife towards his abdomen, but he dodged me again. In my spare time, I caught a glimpse of another criminal dressed in red wielding his sword towards Xuanyun. He couldn't help but throw a fierce blow, leaping into the air and slashing from the criminal's neck to his left chest. Then, he turned around and pulled Xuanyun apart. The criminal in red fell into the air with a knife, turned around to look at the body of his companion next to him, hesitated for a moment, and when he fought with me again, his momentum had already weakened by 2 points. After I cut his arm with a knife, he turned around and fled. I protected Xuanyun from being chased, so I quickly took advantage of the gap to help Xuanyun mount his horse and gave him a fierce whip, saying, "Run quickly." I saw that Qian felt he could handle it here, so I went to help my brother and rushed over, stabbing one of the criminals behind the back. Brother took out his spare time and hit the long gun in the hand of a villain with one blow, then hit the person holding a knife on the other side with another blow and lay on the ground. The archer didn't have many arrows, and by this time the arrows had already been released. He dropped his bow and knelt down to surrender. Yingzhou shot the skinny man down with the tip of the gun pressed against his chest. The skinny man had wounds on his shoulders, arms, and thighs, while others were already dead or injured. The criminal in red stumbled over and knelt next to the skinny man, saying, "Boss, how are you?" Then he kowtowed to Yingzhou and said, "We're not robbers, we just want our horses to escape. Please spare us." Yingzhou withdrew his gun and threw it aside, saying, "Shang Rong, what do you think?" My brother lifted the bow on the ground with a stick and said, "I suspected you were deserters. Look at the markings on this bow, they are indeed soldiers from Datong. Deserters should be executed according to the law. The skinny man sat up with the help of the red-clothed villain and said, "We just don't want to sacrifice our lives for this foolish court anymore." "What's wrong? We leave our hometowns and go through life and death, but our wives, children are being exploited by the court and corrupt officials at home, almost starving to death. Should our lives be so cheap?" Brother frowned and said, "But deserters are deserters after all, let alone you just wanted our lives." Yingzhou sighed and said, "The Buddha says that all living beings are equal. As the saying goes, each person has their own aspirations. Let's go. Master." Brother looked at Yingzhou, and Yingzhou gave him an indifferent smile. Brother took the baton and let him debut. The skinny man looked at us for a while, confirmed that he was really letting them go, then struggled to get up, greeted his still-alive companions, and helped each other slowly leave. We immediately rushed to meet up with Shuangyun, who hugged me tightly and tearfully said, "Jingrong." My brother looked at me with concern and said, "Jingrong, are you okay?" I nodded and said, "At first, I really couldn't do it, after all, it was my first time killing someone. I'm still a bit scared now." I looked down at my hands and they trembled uncontrollably. Yingzhou rode slowly on the horse and said, "Jingrong girl, her moves are both direct and ruthless, truly inheriting from the White Pole Army. Unfortunately, this gameplay is suitable for strong and experienced players. You need to pay more attention to the balance of strength and softness, and randomly change." Me. Madam has also said it, but unfortunately my intelligence is not enough to fully understand what Madam said. Yingzhou looked at me with a smile, then at his brother and said, "You need to report today's situation. Don't bring up any other troubles. Also, don't mention me." My older brother sighed and said, "I probably won't be able to enter the city. Tomorrow morning, I will take the punishment from my father first, and then he will explain it to me on his behalf. The city gate has indeed been closed." After confirming that there are no abnormal situations in the forest not far from the city, our brother went down to the city and shouted, "Is it Brother Guan on duty tonight?" "Brother Guan." A person holding a torch and lying on the city wall said, "Stop shouting. Young master Yu has left the city again. He came back late enough today. Although he has drunk with you twice, I cannot open this door for you." My brother lowered his voice slightly and said, "No need to drive. Could you please have someone go home and announce that both sisters are with me and will go home at dawn?" The person on the city wall chuckled and said, Okay, but you have to teach me the move you won against me last time." "Thank you, big brother." Brother said and slipped back to the forest. He didn't even bring any money when he went out, so he had to make do with it overnight in the forest. Fortunately, the weather was suitable. Chapter 7. Mr. Lu Qian is really a good person. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next morning, Shuangyun and I apologized to our parents with Yingzhou. Our father glared at us, his eyes bloodshot. Seeing that Yingzhou was suppressing us without any symptoms, he first saluted Yingzhou and said, "It's been a long time since we last saw Master. Where have we been traveling these years? I don't know how many children have we been together again." Yingzhou bowed with one hand and said, "I met at the wooden tower. I will talk more about my situation later, and now there is something that needs to be handled by Lord Yu." Although my clothes floated in the river, my mother still saw the bloodstains on my shoes and anxiously said, "What exactly happened?" "Shang Rong." I lowered my head and muttered, "Kneeling outside." The mother looked at her father anxiously, and his father said calmly, "Go change your clothes and take master to clean and have breakfast." After that, she took a big step outside to meet her brother. Soon, there was a loud bang sound, indicating that the move was not easy. Yingzhou exclaimed, "Amit Buddha," and calmly followed the servant to wash. I ran outside and knelt beside my brother, saying, "It's me. I asked my brother to take me and my cousin out. Brother, it's my fault to punish me. But Dad, it's not the time to say this now. We didn't have time to return to the city yesterday. We were attacked and killed a few deserters. Father was shocked and said, "What? Jingrong, you go first." I changed my clothes and stirred the congee in the bowl uneasily. My brother came in and said frankly, "Dad said he would deal with it. Don't worry." 2 days later, a few officers and soldiers arrived at home. My father asked my brother, me, and Xuanyun to come out and answer, while Qian Ju avoided them. After the ceremony, everyone sat down and the father bowed to the leader, saying, "Mr. Lu, could you please come and visit? The children are all here. Feel free to ask if you have anything." Mr. Lu Qian also bowed his hand and said, "Mr. Yu, you're welcome. You already explained the situation clearly last time with the Governor-General and the Inspector, but when it comes to deserters, we still have some detailed questions to ask the young master and young lady. Mr. Yu, don't mind." I watched as Mr. Lu Qian became nervous. He was the one standing on the stone with Qian Ju at the wooden tower. Brother and Xuanyun also noticed that they were quite nervous. However, General Lu Qian's expression remained unchanged. After asking for some details, he stood up and bid farewell. His father and brother escorted him outside the gate. General Lu Qian whispered in his brother's ear, "Tell that master that the people who plundered the people are not worthy of being soldiers and should be killed." My brother bowed deeply to Mr. Lu Qian, who patted his shoulder and turned around to mount his horse and leave. After listening to his brother's narration, Qian Ju joked, "Mr. Qian is really a great person." Qian Ju also said that he was tired and would not go anywhere in Yingzhou in the future, just watching his brother practice martial arts every day. My brother appeared very sad, but in fact, he was very happy. I make excuses every day to send them food and drinks, and secretly jot down some moves. For the sake of her diligence, Shifu should teach her together. My brother couldn't bear it and finally spoke when I was dawdling with dim sum. Qian Ju smiled and said, "I wanted to earn more money for her to eat dim sum for a few days. So I asked her to make some adjustments on the basis of the Qian family's saber technique. You should be careful when you calm down. And Shang Rong, I'm afraid there will be more and more critical situations in the future. You should stop practicing stick today and change to guns instead." My brother and I clenched our fists and said, "Yes. But what about my dim sum? I'm here." Xuanyun emerged from somewhere. "I promise to make master every day so sweet that it's tooth-dropping." Chapter 8. Brother, Autumn Yen Comes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In mid-June, the scorching heat was unbearable, and people were restless. Every day outside, news of various rebel forces was being transmitted, causing panic and anxiety. My father goes out early and returns late every day, sometimes so tired that he doesn't even have dinner and falls asleep while sitting. On this day, it was pouring rain outside, and my mother, I, and Xuanyun were talking in the main room. My father came back from outside without changing his clothes and remained silent. Mother asked cautiously, "What's wrong?" Father remained silent for a long time, followed by a lament. Wang Ziyong invaded Hunan and Shaanxi, and Sichuan General Deng Xian was ordered to mobilize troops to pursue and suppress him. At the beginning of the month, Sichuan General Yang Yechen died in battle, and the bandits planned to attack the Sichuan army's main camp. General Zhang Fengyi was besieged in Yongnian County to cover the retreat of the army, and after a fierce battle for several days, he died for his country. None of his white army survived. What? I grabbed my father's arm and said, "General Zhang Fengyi just gave birth to a child not long ago. How could he go to the battlefield? Is there a misunderstanding of this news?" Father shook his head and said, "There's nothing wrong with the military newspaper. General Zhang Fengyi and his wife have always been deeply married, so General Ma Xianglin probably has no intention of fighting in the north. I don't know what kind of changes will happen. Mother. So what's the current situation? Is Yingzhou still safe? Xuanyun nervously looked at his father upon hearing this. Father. Wang Ziyong was shot and killed by General Deng in the melee, and the bandits have temporarily retreated. What needs to be guarded against now is the Jin people. If the Jin people take advantage of the chaos to kill, my clone may lack skills and it will be difficult to resist. I sat stiffly in the chair, feeling as if my heart was filled with water, heavy and icy. My parents have been taking good care of me since I was young. No matter how big things happen outside, they always smile in front of me. The days before the age of 10 were spent soaking in honey, and I always thought that the entire Ming dynasty was peaceful and peaceful. At the age of 11, things suddenly changed. Words like braid army, chaotic army, escape, and defeat could no longer be hidden, and an atmosphere of confusion and unease enveloped Kyoto. I didn't see the real Ming dynasty until I saw the braid army robbing and killing with my own eyes, and the flames engulfing the sky and sun. However, I thought that with the presence of Lady Qian, generals and armies like the White Army, and officials like my father who worked hard, the Ming dynasty was invincible. But the various news in the past 2 months has made my father increasingly powerless, and I am well aware that the world may really be changing. Xuanyun stood beside me with concern and said, Jing Rong. Me. I'm worried about Mrs. Qian. Dad, Mom, I want to go back to Shizhou. Father. Now the city is safe. I believe General Qian is not an ordinary woman. She can arrange various changes on her own. What can you do to help if you go now? Mother. What your father said is that you should stay at home well. If there are any major changes in the situation, it will be convenient to arrange, and our family can no longer be separated like before. I tacitly agreed, but reluctantly slapped the table and said, the external enemy is fierce, and so many elite soldiers and generals have died in the civil war. It's really not worth it. Father. No nonsense. The complexity of this is something that a little girl like you can understand. Me. I only know that as long as there is war, the majority of those who die are innocent people, and those who suffer are the people. My father rubbed his face wearily and said, all right, let's all leave. Let me be quiet for a while. There are some things I can say at home, but when I go out, I can't say a word randomly. In the spring of the 7th year of Chongjin, Zhang Xianzhong's army was strong and his momentum grew stronger. After successively attacking cities and territories, he captured the important town of Kuizhou in eastern Sichuan. General Qin Liangyu led his army to snipe, while Zhang Xianzhong fled. Coincidentally, General Ma Xianlin returned to Sichuan, and his mother and son were caught in a pincer attack, defeating Zhang Xianzhong greatly. From then on, Zhang Xianzhong was afraid of General Qin and dared not invade Shizhou and the Sichuan region. Qiu Yan was ordered by the Qin general to submit detailed military reports and enter the capital, then detour back to Yingzhou. I received the news and was happy for several days. Together with my brother, I waited early at the city gate. The defense of the city gate has been raised several levels, with strict guards on the city wall, weapons piled up in piles, and 2 deep trenches outside the city wall. At the beginning of the morning sun, startled birds flew into the sky in the distance. Autumn Yen rode a tall warhorse at a gallop, with high hair and a moon-white battle robe that complemented his slender and agile figure. Due to the recent battle, Qiu Yan exuded some determination and courage, and I noticed that his brother's eyes suddenly lit up next to him. Autumn extension. Quiet demeanor. Autumn Yen jumped off the horse and hugged me. Madam, are you okay? Did you not get injured in the battle with Zhang Xianzhong this time? Where is General Ma and the young master? Are they all okay? Qiu Yan patted my head and said, everything is fine. General Ma has been feeling down because of General Feng Yi's death. Fortunately, with the young master, he can cheer up my child to some extent. In 2 months, it will be Madam's 60th birthday. General Ma said he must spend a good time with Madam. That's really great. I have prepared a birthday gift for my wife, and you happen to bring it back. I pulled over my brother behind me and said, "This is my brother, Yingzhou. When he went to pick me up at Shizhou last year, you all met, but time was running out and we didn't have time to talk." Brother regained his senses and saluted Qiu Yan. Qiu Yan smiled and said, "I've heard Jingrong talk about my older brother all day, so I finally got to know him." My older brother also smiled and said, "I've been listening to Jingrong talk about autumn extension all day, and I finally got to know her today." On the way home, Qian told us about the situation of the expedition against Zhang Xianzhong. The bravery of the White Army goes without saying. When Zhang Xianzhong retreated, he always exclaimed, "Qin Liangyu is too terrifying, the soldiers in Sichuan are too terrifying." My brother and I laughed heartily. And for the first time, Qiu Yan truly penetrated into enemy positions and fought alongside the soldiers. The details of each knife and gun made our hair stand on end. When I turned red-eyed, I actually had no idea in my heart. I only knew how to kill the enemy, and survive on my own. Qiu Yan smiled slightly dejectedly and said, "This is different from what I originally thought. Actually, no matter who I kill, I feel uncomfortable in my heart. Maybe a few more times, it won't be like this anymore." I held her hand and said, "I understand." My older brother was unusually excited and said, "I heard Jingrong say that Qiu Yan is the same age as me. As a woman, she can gallop on the battlefield and fight to the death, which makes me very embarrassed. When I go back, I tell my parents that I also want to join the army." Qiu Yan gave him an appreciative look, and I curled my lips and said, "Mother won't agree." Brother instantly vented his anger and secretly glanced at Qiu Yan again. My mother once said that if my brother wants to join the army, he can also marry his wife first, leave behind a man and a half women, and then go without delay, so as not to have any unforeseen circumstances. Qiu Yan can only stay in Yingzhou for 2 days. After visiting my mother, he said he wanted to see if I had made any progress. Brother and Qian were full of interest, watching the battle beside them. When it comes to fighting with punches, kicks, and knives, I can still handle it. Qiu Yan praised me for improving a lot, especially in terms of knife techniques, which are more flexible and versatile than before. She put in a lot of effort to barely win. At the spear, I didn't have the strength to fight back after receiving a few moves, and Qiu Yan shook his head repeatedly. I held the spear and shook her head, saying, "Don't shake it. Your spear is already dancing like flowers, and I can't compare myself to it." Qian stuffed peanuts into his mouth and nodded. "This girl is truly worthy of General Qin's training since childhood. Her strength and moves are unparalleled." My older brother was eager to try. "Autumn Yan, let's have a competition, how about it?" Qian glanced at his brother and said, "Don't embarrass me." My older brother approached with a gun and clenched his fists at Qiu Yan, making a gesture of invitation. The two of them simultaneously launched attacks, and the gun tips collided fiercely, making a crisp sound. Qiu Yan grinned and said, "It seems that Shang Rong is much more powerful than Jing Rong. I need to be careful." My older brother was a bit proud and said, "Please accept." I stood next to Qian and made way for them, saying, "Just compare yourself, don't harm me." Qiu Yan is swift and powerful, while his brother is versatile yet precise in his attacks. The competition between the two is intense, with long spears flying in the air. When Qiu Yan launched another strong attack, his brother fought hard to resist, revealing a loophole. Qiu Yan leapt suddenly, and his spear pierced his chest. Brother didn't have time to dodge, so he could only receive the blow with a horizontal spear. With a loud bang, the two of their long spears collided and produced several sparks. Brother was shaken back a few steps, while Qiu Yan stood firmly in place. My brother stabilized his figure and said, "I lost." Qiu Yan's marksmanship is truly admirable. Qiu Yan also lowered his stance and said, Shang Rong is also a rare good opponent. Yingzhou wiped his bald head and said, Apprentice, starting tomorrow, your training will double. I hugged Qiuyan's arm and said, Qiuyan, I only found out today that you really show mercy to me every time. Qiu Yan hugged her chest and looked at me, otherwise, you would think so. Mother and Shuang Yun came over with dim sum and tea. Are you tired? Have a rest. So everyone sat around and chatted, which was also a rare and comfortable time. My brother occasionally looked at Qiuyan, but quickly dodged when they met. I saw it in my eyes, and my heart was filled with joy. The next day, I took Qiuyan to the busiest street market in Yingzhou and talked a lot privately. I asked Qiuyan about her impression of her brother, but she smiled silently and turned to a serious tone, saying, Jingrong, you need to be careful when you are in Yingzhou. Madam said that the Jin people are restless, and from various signs, there may be large-scale actions. Yingzhou is close to the border, so you need to discuss with your family early to see if you can avoid it. I no longer joke, my father will definitely not leave. He has always said he needs to trust the court. After my mother had the experience of fleeing last time, she didn't want to separate from my father anymore. Don't worry, if there is really a fight, we will act according to the situation. Qiu Yan repeatedly reminded, safety is always the top priority. Chapter 9. Assault. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In July, Huang Taiji personally led a large army to divide into 4 routes and enter the Ming dynasty. If a gust of wind suddenly arrived, he occupied the upper fortress, security and other areas, and Kyoto was under martial law. The main force of the Jin army rushed towards Xuanfu and Datong. My mother looked at the gloomy sky outside with a furrowed brow and said, I should have sent Xuanyun away earlier. It's only been about 10 days since we left, and who knew that the Braid army had just entered. I hope everything is safe on the way, otherwise how can I explain it to your uncle? I comforted and said, with 4 highly skilled guards following, nothing will happen. My father almost trotted back all the way, while my brother followed closely behind, sweating profusely. My mother and I knew it was not good, so we quickly welcomed it. Father. Datong was lost, and the Jin army divided their troops into Yingzhou, stationed 20 miles away from the city and ready to attack at any time. Shang Rong and Jing Rong, protect your mother and leave the city first from the south gate. Mother. If you don't leave, I won't leave either. If the women of the common people can stay, I can do the same. I can bring food to the defending army and take care of the wounded. I can do all of these. Mother, please leave with Jingrong. I will stay and protect my father. I will definitely take care of him, said the older brother urgently. Mother shook her head and looked at her father, her gaze gentle yet firm. Father. Anyway, the military and the people worked together to defend the city gate. The Jin people attacked long distances just for plunder. If we can hold on, the Jin people will not stay long. I held my mother's hand and said, my brother and I can fight with the army. Dad and Mom, you don't know martial arts, so be careful. My father looked at me and my brother with tears in his eyes and said, I am very proud to have children like this. But if it really comes to the end, don't worry about us. It's important to protect your own lives, remember. Brother clenched the long spear in his hand and said, we won't get to that point. Jingrong, let's go. I hugged my mother, went back to the room, changed into neat clothes, grabbed a knife and bow and arrow, and followed my brother straight to the city gate guard. My older brother found the Guan elder brother who helped us pass the message last time. He was a small general of the defending army in Yingzhou. After hearing about our intentions, he recommended us to the defending general. General, these are the young masters and young ladies of the Yu family. They are highly skilled in martial arts and have come to assist in defending the city. My brother and I clasped our fists and saluted. I have seen the general. General Tsun had a broad face and a square forehead, and his voice was rough and powerful. I had previously dispatched troops to assist Datong in Yingzhou, but to my surprise, Datong fell. Now is the time when there is a shortage of manpower. Thank you for your help. At this moment, General Lu Qian led 2 soldiers in and said, General, the sentinel reports that the Jin army is cooking rice from a pot, and there is wine in the leader's tent. It seems that they won't take action today. General Sun frowned and said, they want to rest for a day, gather enough strength, and then attack the city again. I suggested, they want to rest well, but we won't let them. Tonight, we'll go on a surprise attack. Mr. Lu Qian was not surprised to see my brother and I, and nodded slightly at us, saying, but now we only have 3,000 troops in the city, and the Jin army has nearly 20,000 troops. Moreover, the Jin army is very skilled in combat, and our army does not have an advantage in close combat. If we launch a surprise attack outside the city, we may be suppressed by the Jin army's counterattack. At present, we are still the most secure in our defense. General Sun waved his hand and said, if the Jin army wins all the way, they will inevitably be arrogant and not take precautions. It is not appropriate for the army to leave the city, but we must also give them some color to see. Tonight, I will personally lead a team of archers to launch a mobile attack, and you will lead troops to receive them. I clenched my fists and said, General, I have a suggestion. If what I said is not correct, please forgive me. General Qian, please speak. Me. Tonight we can divide into 2 teams, one led by you and the other led by my brother and me. Don't use ordinary arrows, use rockets for your team. After starting the attack, you will be in the open, and General Lu Qian will take over from behind, fighting and retreating. When the Jin army comes out, my brother and I will fight from the side. General Sun sneered, the fire can be even bigger. At 4 o'clock that night, dark clouds filled the sky, and the slightest breeze could not dissipate the scorching heat in the air. The sharp cicadas chirped one after another. 3 teams of people quietly left the city and dispersed in 2 directions, with their hooves wrapped in cloth and their mouths covered in cages. They only heard each other's deep breathing. Most of the people in the Jin army stronghold were sleeping, and the guards on duty were also unconscious. Suddenly, the sound of pottery jars shattering shattered the calm, and the smell of cooking oil quickly spread in the air. Before the guards could react, rockets scattered like shooting stars, and the fire spread among multiple camps. The village was filled with shouts, and the Jin soldiers picked up weapons and rushed out of the camp. However, a few people were still burned by the fire, rolling painfully on the ground. After a brief commotion, the Jin army quickly calmed down and galloped out one after another. General Sun's team held torches and fought fiercely against the first Jin soldiers to charge out. After killing several Jin soldiers, they immediately retreated, and the Jin army rushed after them. Unable to catch up for 2 miles, a few ropes suddenly popped out, and the first few horses of the Jin army tripped over. The horses following closely could not stop and stampeded past, and the fallen Jin soldiers were trampled to death. General Lu Qian led his men and horses to fight out, and General Sun also turned around to kill. The night was filled with the sound of metal collisions and screams. Just as the Jin army was gathering more and more, about to besiege General Sun and General Lu Qian's troops, the Jin army suddenly launched a series of hidden arrows from the side, and the Jin soldiers who were hit by the arrows all fell to the ground. There is an ambush, retreat. The Jin army was in chaos and quickly retreated towards the stronghold. With the faint light and sound of the fire, I shot quickly. My brother saw that I had shot all the arrows and shouted, "Kill! Kill! Kill!" Everyone drew their swords, picked up their long spears, and rushed out of the darkness to pursue the Jin soldiers. My older brother took the lead and fired his gun, stabbing 2 Jin soldiers who were running last. As he was about to chase after him, General Sun arrived and said, "While the Jin army can't figure out how many troops we have now, retreat quickly." So, the archer with the remaining arrows in his hand fired them towards the direction of the Jin soldiers and hit the few Jin soldiers running at the back. We took advantage of the darkness and rushed back to the city. General Qian took off his helmet and said, "It's really a relief. We have won this first battle. Everyone, take a break. There will be a fierce battle tomorrow." Chapter 10. Battle of Yingzhou. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On the second day, the Jin army surged forward like a tide and surrounded the city of Yingzhou. The leader is a man with a long beard, not wearing a war robe, only wearing black armor, and his exposed arms are dark and robust. Longbeard shouted, "The Ming army only knows how to play some inconspicuous tricks. What kind of skill is a sneak attack? If you have the seeds, come out and kill them openly." General Qian replied on the city wall, "Even bandits deserve to talk about fairness and justice. Longbeard, I won't talk nonsense to you. Surrender quickly, otherwise I will level your city of Yingzhou with an iron horse." General Qian, "It depends on whether you have the ability." Longbeard shouted loudly, "Up!" The front cavalry retreated in response, and 2 rows of chariots quickly pushed out from the Jin army. The archers hid behind the chariots and headed straight towards the city wall. After entering range, the sharp arrows shot fiercely towards the city wall. The cavalry of the Jin army and the infantry carrying the siege ladder followed closely behind the chariots, surging like locusts. General Qian seized the opportunity and gave an order, with rockets and fireballs pouring out from the city wall, while 2 light artillery pieces were fired simultaneously. For a moment, there were constant screams of killing and brutality, and the smell of oil and blood made the air thicker. The young soldier next to him was shot in the neck by an arrow, fell to the ground and twitched, and after a few whimpers, he lost his breath. I filled his vacancy, quickly drew my bow and fired arrows, and deeply understood what Qiu Yao said. Truly facing the battlefield, there was no time to fear or think, only under the instinct of survival, to kill and kill. The Jin army hesitated and could not advance under the suppression of artillery and dense rockets. With a wave of their bearded long sword, the Jin army launched several catapults and crossbows. Heavy stones and giant fireballs roared and smashed deep pits on the city wall. Unfortunately, the soldiers who were hit were instantly crushed into flesh and mud. The giant arrows emitted by the crossbow roared, either shattering the women's wall or firmly nailing into the city wall, becoming a climbing aid for the attacking Jin army. The Jin army gradually approached the city wall in a fierce attack and defense, and the pre-dug trenches and iron briars on the ground only briefly affected the speed of the Jin army's advance. Some of the Jin soldiers were already climbing the ladder, and General Qian was also a bit panicked at this moment. He commanded the use of a knight fork and wolf-toothed racket, but unfortunately, the number of Jin soldiers was too large. The ones in front were killed, while the ones behind continued to rush forward on the corpses of their companions. They watched as the Jin army would soon break through the defense and climb up the city wall. Mr. Lu Qianzong's face was covered in blood stains, and he rushed to General Qian in confusion. "General, we can't hold on anymore." "Let's go out," said Guan, who followed Mr. Lu Qianzong with a spear in his hand and a resolute expression, "Let's go out." General Qian clenched his fist, his veins bulging in his hand. He clenched his fists fiercely at General Lu Qian, Brother Guan, and a group of soldiers, saying, "There will be death but no life. Everyone, today is the time for us to serve the court." He then turned to kneel in the distance and kowtowed 3 times. "Father, mother, son is unfilial." He then angrily stood up and left the city, with all the soldiers following closely behind. My older brother smashed a stone fiercely into the city and shouted at me, "Jingrong, go find your father and mother." He turned around and chased General Qian. I quickly drew my arrow and followed suit, but to my surprise, Brother Guan stopped us all and said, "You don't need to follow suit and fight hard. Guard the city wall well." Brother didn't listen. General Qian rode on a black war horse without looking back. "If all of us soldiers die, you can escape with the people. This is a military order." After speaking, he ordered the gatekeeper to suddenly open the door, and the Jin soldier who hit the door fell to the ground. General Qian led the troops to wield his sword and kill them. The gatekeeper quickly pushed his cart forward as a temporary city gate. Behind the Lu Qianzong Hall, he guarded the city gate, wielding a curved moon sword. The sword's shadow flipped and the cold light flashed, causing the surrounding Jin soldiers to fall like fallen leaves. Lu Qianzong chopped down the last Jin soldier at the city gate, and immediately swung his sword at the gate, shouting, "Close the city gate." Helping to close the city gate, my brother and I quickly ran back to the wall. A small number of Jin soldiers had already climbed over the wall, fighting against the defending soldiers. My older brother shot in, and I drew my sword to follow. Several Jin soldiers did not survive, but soon new Jin soldiers climbed up. Gradually, we couldn't resist. I leaned behind my brother and said, "We need to find a way to push down those ladders." Brother stabbed down a Jin soldier and said, "More and more people are coming up, and we can't separate them." As I spoke, a huge arrow from a crossbow hit me. My brother quickly grabbed me and rolled around to avoid it. Two Jin soldiers next to me were shot and nailed to the city wall with arrows. Before we could even get up, 3 or 4 Jin soldiers surrounded us. As the cold air of their swords reached our heads, a sharp impact suddenly hit us. The knives of several Jin soldiers were almost simultaneously shaken to the ground, and Yingzhou waved a dark iron rod in front of us. "Master!" My brother and I stood up in surprise. Yingzhou stared at Jin Bing and said, "Dare to touch my disciple and seek death." The Jin soldiers touched their hands, which were numb from the shock, and rushed towards the ladder, climbing back down. Yingzhou hit the ladder with a stick, and the ladder instantly broke, causing several Jin soldiers to fall and die. Yingzhou stood the iron rod on the ground and shouted loudly, "What are you waiting for? Come up and help." Many people immediately appeared on the stone stairs of the city wall. The people of Yingzhou city brought hoes, harrows, shovel, stones, some even carried bundles of straw and firewood, and some brought bags of lime powder. Father and mother were also inside, dragging a basket of kitchen knives together. I hugged them and said, "What are you doing here? It's too dangerous." Father's gaze was deep as he said, "How can we watch soldiers and children fight to the death while we shrink behind? Even if we fight to death with everyone, it's better to live a miserable life." My mother patted my hand and said, "Good child, let's go together." The people also shouted, "Defend Yingzhou together." Yingzhou waved his hand and said, "Stop yelling. Get down a bit and spread out quickly. I see that there are few fireballs and arrows in the city. There are stones, lime powder and grass. Help the archers and greet them when they go down. And Lord, you, don't leave your kitchen knife to chop people. Look down and see if you can hit 1 or 2. Group of people with hoes, harrows and shovel. Help the soldiers to hit the people who climb the ladder. Don't put one of them up." I don't know who brought a few strings of firecrackers, lit them, and threw them down with a chaotic sound, which stunned the Jin soldiers. The others quickly took the opportunity to throw stones, lit thatch, and firewood down, and many Jin soldiers were hit and fell off ladders. I poured fire oil onto several ladders, and as soon as the flying thatch touched them, the fire immediately spread. The Jin soldiers who had climbed halfway had to retreat. A few big brothers covered their faces and sprinkled lime powder 1 spoonful after another. The archer took advantage of the fact that the Jin soldiers were blinded and fired his arrows accurately. Father and mother, on the other hand, hid behind the city wall and threw the kitchen knife with all their strength. Indeed, the flying knife struck 1 or 2 Jin soldiers. Yingzhou and his brother helped the soldiers accelerate the twisting of the wolf-toothed racket. With the swing of the wolf-toothed racket, the Jin soldiers were pulled up like ants and fell down one after another. After this chaotic battle, the Jin soldiers on the city wall were actually forced to retreat, retreating a few steps away from the wall. At this moment, both sides stopped attacking, and the entire battlefield experienced a eerie brief silence. Under the city, General Qian led a defending army with their backs against the city gate, surrounded by mountains of corpses. The Jin army formed a semi-circular circle a few yards away from the defending army, and with long beards, they drove their horses forward a few steps. "You will undoubtedly be defeated. Surrender early, and I will spare you from death." General Qian remained calm as water and said, "The soldiers of the Ming dynasty only fought to the death, not surrendered." Lu Qianzong shook his arms and shouted loudly, "Do not surrender in a desperate battle." Thousands of soldiers shouted loudly, "No surrender in battle. No surrender in battle. No surrender in battle." Long-bearded, no longer answering, raised his long sword and directly took General Qian. General Qian mounted his horse to face the battle. The soldiers from both sides met like two tides, falling into a melee, and the Jin soldiers under the city wall launched another fierce attack. The soldiers on the city wall shouted loudly, "Shoot the arrows. Kill them. Hurry up." Yingzhou commanded the people, just like before, "Do a good job of assisting. If you run out of things, quickly step back and go down to move more stones up. The people behind you hold on to the top. Squat down, be careful of flying arrows. I act as an archer, quickly aiming and shooting arrows, with no missed shots." At this moment, I saw General Qian being forced by Longbeard to barely resist. Although the distance was too far and I was not very sure, I still drew my bow and aimed at Longbeard's neck. 1, 2, 3, let go. I stared at the direction of the arrow flying, the arrow made of refined iron shining with a cold light. As I was about to touch the Longbeard, my heart lifted to my throat. Unfortunately, Longbeard dodged sideways at the last moment, and the arrow brushed against his right face, taking down his right ear. Two Jin soldiers rushed over immediately to protect their beards. Beards pushed them away, covering their ears with one hand and pointing towards me with the other. I quickly shot a second arrow, which was shot down by one of the generals. "Be careful." My brother suddenly knocked me down, and a fireball hit the female wall behind me. While the female wall was shattered, the fire ignited the nearby military flag and oil, and two civilians were burned, struggling to fall off the city wall. "The shells are gone." The gunner looked up in panic, covered in dust, sweat, and blood. "My arrow is gone. I'm also gone." Several archers shouted almost simultaneously. With a loud bang, a wolf-toothed racket was hit by a crossbow, and the bracket broke. The wolf-toothed racket fell completely, crushing a group of Jin soldiers but leaving a defensive gap. The surrounding Jin soldiers quickly climbed up a ladder. Brother clenched his spear and stood guard above the ladder. Those without weapons, "Hurry down, run, run." No one left, everyone picked up stones, picked up broken city wall bricks, picked up anything that could be smashed out, and fully guarded the last line of defense. Some people shed tears and pulled arrows from their companions' corpses, delivering them to the archer's side. But the Jin army's attack became increasingly fierce, and more people fell down in the attacks of arrow rain and fireball. Finally, except for scattered stones and wooden stakes, everyone was left with only knives and guns in their hands, and the Jin army rushed forward in groups. Yingzhou slapped several Jin soldiers down the wall and said, "Villagers, run." The defenders also shouted while fighting, "Run away." Still no one left. Some people dragged golden soldiers down the city wall, and some waved shovel desperately, but were cut to death by the golden soldiers behind. My brother and I stood in front of our parents and fought hard. At this moment it was already dusk, and a fiery red glow passed through the figures of the Jin army, splashing blood that became even more brilliant. The encirclement at the city gate has shrunk to only a little, and General Qian is covered in injuries, panting heavily. Lu Qianzong held a large sword, blocking at the front, with no fear in his eyes, proudly looking at the Jin soldiers. Brother Guan and dozens of soldiers formed a circle, their gaze resolute. "Kill," General Tsun's ambiguous voice. Kill. Mr. Lu Qian fiercely made a decisive decision. Kill. The final farewell of the soldiers. Big Beard hesitated for a moment, his eyes flashing with admiration, but he still waved his hand and the Ming army was instantly submerged by the Jin army. The city gate collapsed with a loud bang. On the city wall, there were very few remaining guards, and the father hugged his mother and said, "Child, you should kill yourselves. There is still a glimmer of hope for life." Mother tearfully said, "Shang Rong, Jing Rong, you must live well." After speaking, the two of them looked at each other with a smile, jumped off the city wall together, and were trampled by countless Jin soldiers. Dad. Mom. I was about to jump off when I was blocked by Qianju's stick and said, "Master, you and Madam don't want to drag you down. You must be obedient and live well. Follow me." Brother gritted his teeth and said, "Yes, alive." The three of us leaned against the city wall and killed for a while. As the Jin soldiers rushed into the city, Qianju instructed his brother to climb onto a ladder and knock it down with one stick. When the ladder fell into mid-air, his brother took advantage of the situation and jumped down. "Next is me," Qianju finally. My long bearded ears were not yet bandaged, and I stood on the city wall with blood all over my neck. I shot an arrow fiercely at me and was shot down by my brother. Soon, a small group of Jin soldiers and elite cavalry chased out of the city. Qianju jumped up high and knocked the person on the front horse off the horse with a stick. He flipped over and then took another horse and handed it to his brother, who also pulled me onto the horse. We galloped on horseback, with dozens of Jin soldiers chasing closely behind us. The night has fallen, and the moon is as thin as willow leaves. Under the faint moonlight, the figure of the Jin soldiers can be vaguely seen undulating. I sat behind my brother, tightly gripping his collar, my heart beating like a drum, and my brother's breathing was clearly heavy and chaotic. After a long struggle, our physical strength was almost overwhelmed. Suddenly, a cavalry rushed towards our side, and my brother's spear shot out in an instant, colliding with the sword of the Jin army. I was almost thrown off my horse by the impact force, and in a panic, I tried my best to stabilize my body. I quickly swung a knife to help and struck the Jin soldier's waist. The Jin soldier fell off his horse, and the rest of the Jin soldiers had already taken the opportunity to surround me. Qianju quickly turned his horse's head, and the sound of the collision between the iron rod and the long sword was dense and intense. My older brother let out a loud roar, as if he was about to use all his life strength, and suddenly quickened his hand movements. Every strike was a deadly move. This attack was quickly pushed back, with nearly half of the Jin soldiers killed or injured. Qianju's arm was slashed, and we flew away again. The Jin soldiers shouted and cursed loudly from behind, and their pursuit speed did not decrease at all. The blurry shadows of trees on the roadside quickly receded, and we entered a low hill where the horses slowed down. My older brother was panting heavily, and his back was getting tighter and tighter. I knew he was trying his best to persevere. Jin Bing gradually got closer to us again, and someone threw a short knife, which grazed the horse's buttocks. In the horse's panic, my brother and I were thrown to the ground. "Brother!" The long sword flashed a cold light as it slashed straight at my brother's neck. I pushed forward desperately, splattering blood and accompanied by a sharp pain. I felt a tearing sensation in my abdomen. Jing Rong. My older brother stabbed Jin Bing's horse in the stomach. Jin Bing fell off his horse and was stabbed in the chest by his brother. Qianju rushed over and blocked us from behind, saying, "Protect Jingrong." Brother quickly took off his coat, tied it tightly to my wound, stood up with his gun, and shouted, "Come on. I just feel dizzy, close my eyes, every breath becomes clear, and the sounds of fighting and shouting seem to be getting farther and farther away." In a trance, the sound of horses' hooves in the distance came like a storm. I seemed to hear the sound of Qiu Yan, and several other sounds seemed familiar, but I couldn't tell who they were.